Hello everyone, I'm Ann Clay, and I'm presenting the Nebraska Native Pollinator Project as part of the EVSP 501 class. The purpose of this project is to increase the amount and quality of food for native pollinators in Nebraska to help increase their numbers. This will be accomplished through the increased use of pollinator-friendly cover crops on fields and through the addition of native plants to private and public property. The project's vision is to expand habitat for native Nebraska pollinators while reducing water waste across the state. Decision-making members will include a project lead, vice project lead, and 2 committee leads, heading both a government committee and a private citizen committee. Formal plans must be created and approved by all government agencies involved, including the NDOT, NDNR, NDA, OPR, OPD, MUD, and DCT. Public announcement of and hearing of plans must be performed by the NDOT, NDNR, OPR, and DCT. The project will create 4 models. The first 2 will deal with agricultural land cover, crop, and native plant usage. The third model will cover highway land increasing native plant coverage. And the fourth model will model businesses and residences increasing native plant coverage. The committees will decide on specific incentives in a campaign. Both committees will decide on water bill and tax credits and other incentives for residents and businesses. The Farmer and Rancher subcommittees and both NDA members will discuss education and an incentive plan. The Private Citizen Committee will educate citizens and business owners. And both committees will conduct public meetings in communities to gather input and increase awareness of the project. The Nebraska Department of Natural Resources members will organize and train volunteers. The team will be comprised of 10 volunteers plus 1 coordinator. They will decide on methods and timelines and survey control group areas and newly planted areas. They will catalog prior established native planted urban, roadside, and agricultural areas to use as control group areas, and they will compare these with newly planted areas and areas already populated with non-native plants. Volunteers will record numbers and species of pollinators in control areas and newly planted areas every 2 weeks from March through November. They will analyze records and compare to find trends. They'll assess the most beneficial plant mixes. GIS and aerial photography of roadside and agricultural lands will help members assess changes in vegetation coverage, and they will conduct on-foot observations to supplement the GIS data to determine specific makeup of photographed areas. Annual surveys will be sent to farmers and ranchers in January to assess attitudes towards cover cropping and planting native species in field margins and on grazing land, changes in what cover crops they're planting, what time they're planting and harvesting them, and whether or not they're seeing improvements in yield or income as a result. It will also ask whether or not their decision-making was affected by the project. Annual surveys will also be sent to businesses and homeowners in January to assess awareness of the program, attitudes towards it, how many square feet of native plants they've planted in the past 12 months, and how their decision-making was affected by the project. During winter months, project members will analyze data collected during the warm months to determine changes in coverage of native plants and cover crops from the original measurement and from previous year's measurements, as well as numbers and species of pollinators from previous measurements. They'll analyze trends to see which areas are most receptive to program outreach efforts, which areas saw the greatest increases in pollinator population, and which species were recorded. They will see whether or not real planting and pollinator outcomes compared well with models, and whether or not pollinator numbers changed in areas that stayed inhabited by non-native plants. The project will determine how effective models were at prediction. To account for effects of climate change, 4 different scenarios will be considered, covering changes in rainfall and variation in seasonal temperature variation. They will change outreach methods based on how effective the year's method, and they will determine the effectiveness of different incentives. Research into patterns of climate change over the coming years will improve understanding of impacts to Nebraska ecology. Based on this, and research into biology of native plants and cover crops, recommended seed mixtures, plants, and cover crops may change. Further research into biology and breeding cycles of native bees and other pollinators will inform policy. In closing, during the iterative phase of the project, members will perform decision-making and follow-up monitoring. They will assess the data collected and use it to update models and methods. New information gained through institutional learning will be incorporated into the decision-making process.